Welcome to Coffee with Rorath Mountain Rescue Team, a series of video blogs that I'm putting together during my extended study leave. This is the first post, and I trust it won't be the last post. But it's also important because it's been commissioned by Elizabeth, who has asked me to speak about preaching without notes. Because I do. That's the way I usually preach. And I could say that that's because preaching without notes is really effective. It's a way of engaging with the congregation directly and getting the message across. I could also be honest and say that I find preaching with notes not effective, quite simply because I tend to get lost in my notes. And if I do come up for air and then go back down again, I've lost my place. And also the preparation. I'm never happy with notes that I've prepared. This works much better for me. People think it's dead easy, and people will say to me, as they have on occasion, "Isn't it wonderful that you can preach off the cuff?" I wish. No, if I don't prepare properly, it shows up very quickly. Sermons are too long. They don't flow properly, which is probably why they're too long. And the landing and the endings are awful, kind of like an aeroplane trying to come into land but missing the runway and circling and trying again and again and eventually just bumping down in ignominious fashion. No, preparation is vital. It kind of reminds me of something that Fred Astaire is supposed to have said, that if it doesn't look easy, we probably haven't practiced and prepared enough. So, how do I prepare? For me, this usually happens in 3 stages. The first is mapping the territory, the second, finding the waymarks, and the third is practicing. The first stage is, in all honesty, far and away the most important. It's simply listening to what the scriptures say, prayerfully and slowly, and trying to do it as though I don't actually know what they say. You know how you open the Bible. Oh yeah, I know what that passage is about. And that short circuits so much of what God wants to say so often, I find. So slowing down, listening to what the Bible has to say in its own right, without thinking, how do I use this in a sermon? Stage 1. And so to stage 2, the waymarks. Now, having mapped the territory, I've got to find a way through it. And my approach to this is to just start talking as though I'm talking to a friend about the things that I've found out as I've mapped the territory. Eventually, I'll suddenly click on a line that goes through and that can form a good sermon. For me, it's got one point. There's one aim to a sermon, so far as I'm concerned. And I'll look back down that line and find the key points. So, for example, if I was doing this talk as I would preach, the waymarks would be something like Rorath Mountain Rescue Team, that was the opening, then Fred Astaire. That's what I'm aiming to through the introduction. And then the 3 stages of preparation, the mapping the territory, this stage, the waymarks, and finally the practicing, and then final 2 sections, preaching, and just an epilogue, a bit of fun at the end to say cheerio. That's all I would need to remind me of the path that I've used to go through the territory. Different people will remember it in different ways. Some might actually just jot those words down and perhaps a bit more detail, if that's what you're good at, on a piece of paper and use that. For me, as I say, the more detail becomes confusing, and actually I can remember the words, so I don't need the piece of paper for just the small amount that we're talking about here. The final stage of preparation is practicing, and I'll actually just stand up and preach to an empty church, usually on a Saturday evening, possibly a Sunday morning. I'll also sometimes just go for a walk if that's the fancy. Now you might be worried, of course, that folk will think you bonkers if you start talking to yourself as you walk down the street. But you know what's technology for? You just put a pair of headphones in, hold a phone, and people will assume that you're talking and having a very deep conversation with somebody a long way away, when actually you're just talking to yourself. Isn't technology wonderful, even when it's not turned on? And so finally we get to preach the sermon. Before the service, I'll have flicked through my waymarks to make sure that they're clear in my mind, and perhaps again during the gradual hymn. As I stand up to preach, I know where I'm going, I know my territory, and I know my way through it. And I will just have a conversation with the congregation. It can be dangerous because if you get a laugh when you're not expecting it, or you just get a response that you're not quite expecting, that can be fun, and it can sometimes take you slightly off course. Actually, the most dangerous thing is when somebody says something really interesting just before the service and you think, that's got to be part of my sermon. And of course that's not part of your preparation, and it can really throw you off. What the heck? You know your territory, you know the route through it, and you just get yourself back on course. Even if you have to apologise, that just adds a bit of humanity to the process. That's the way I do it. I hope you find it useful, and I hope that helps you stimulate thought about your own way of preaching. So, cheerio, and thank you for listening to Rorath Mountain Rescue Team.